Welcome, El Paso, to Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera. My name is Jules Simon, and I'm a philosopher from UTEP. Today, if you've been following our show, you know that it's usually my partner, Kim Diaz, and I doing the interviews, but she couldn't be here today. So I'll be interviewing Boomer Trujillo, my colleague at UTEP, on the theme for our show this year, which is on beauty and aesthetics. So I'd like to say a few things about Boomer. Fantasizes about living on Captain Picard's Enterprise, exploring the universe with his dog, friends, and favorite philosophers. He'd like nothing more than to eat bean burritos and drink espresso with Diogenes of Sinope, Albert Camus, and Ursula K. Guin. Or maybe he'd spend time eating pizza and watching sports, comedies, and horror movies with Aristotle, Hegel, and David Foster Wallace. In reality, Boomer teaches ethics and ancient Greek philosophy at the University of Texas at El Paso, and he explores cyberspace through philosophy live streams on Twitch. He loves talking about what it means to live well, how to become a good person, and why it's so important to enjoy art and life. His first book, The Virtue of Playfulness, Why Happy People Are Playful, is coming out in April 2024. That's now.
Yeah, that's soon.
Yeah, and well, welcome to our show.
Thanks so much.
And I'm sorry Kim couldn't be here, but I'm happy I can be here interviewing you.
Yeah, no, likewise. I mean, both of y'all are really wonderful. I mean, I've been here, this is my second year, had interactions with both of you through UTEP and Society for Mexican American Philosophy and all sorts of stuff, so it's been great. Happy to be here.
Well, let's start off. So the theme for this year has been beauty and aesthetics. But I would like to actually start off with your book, talking about your book. Tell us a little bit more about playfulness.
Playfulness, or thinking about playfulness, kind of just came up as one of those areas where I wasn't finding too many people talking about it. My original love in philosophy was the philosophy of art. I mean, ancient has always been there. So I really love, for example, Plato's Republic, you know, the masterwork of Plato and his political philosophy. But one of the interesting things about the Republic is books 3 and 4 have this educational program where they teach people to live well, and they do it through music and poetry.
All right.
And so like music and poetry and games, they play a huge role in training people to become well or become good. And then book 10, which is the final book of the Republic, Plato does this thing that surprises a lot of people and launched a ton of debates, where he decides to ban poets who produce immoral artwork from the just society. And that question always fascinated me. When I was young, I was in lots of hardcore punk bands, and I really loved horror movies. And I could imagine Plato being like, neither of those things would be allowed in utopia. Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. And so like that intersection between ethics and politics and art is kind of like what got me into philosophy. And you studied at Temple, which was like, I was thrilled to hear, because that's one of the powerhouse schools, and I almost went there, but I ended up like specializing in ethics instead of philosophy of art. But I was very close to studying some of the stuff probably that you would have.
Philosophy of art and ethics, art, and politics, that's my wheelhouse as well.
Good.
We're on common ground there. But before we started today, I asked you about our list of questions, and you said there's some really difficult ones, and I just want to start off with the hardest one yet, and get right at it, because it's hard to think of a world, idealistic, Platonic world, that doesn't include some kind of beauty in it. And so, with Plato banning the poets and the artists from his ideal city, would he be banning beauty as well? I mean, what do you think of beauty? Maybe we can put the Plato thing to the side for the time.
I mean, I'm happy to talk about whichever, but no, I mean, so the big
beauty in general.
Yeah, the big question, what is beauty in general? That's a really tough one. I mean, I think generally speaking, we can kind of get a little bit of an orientation you can think about the beauty of, say, mathematics. So we think that like beauty can be a judgment about abstract objects or abstract concepts or something like that. You can think about the beauty of really concrete things.
Wait 1 second.
Yeah.
So when you make a judgment about the beauty of abstract concepts,
Yeah.
in what way are you calling that beautiful? Is it the relationship of function? Is it a functional sort of judgment that you're making? That it works so well that it's beautiful, and you find that?
Yeah, so this is, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know that I've ever looked at a mathematical, I'm not good at math. I mean, I'm okay at math, but enough to see it. But I guess like whenever a system falls into place, I think, so if we want to give some general characterizations of beauty, I mean, I think there's probably a couple. One is there's some sort of attraction to whatever it is that you're ascribing beauty to.
Okay, that I can get on board with,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
That's right away. You've got to be attracted to the beautiful.
Yeah, so it's not repulsion, although if we get into the sublime, it gets a little bit weird with respect to that. But with beauty, I think there's probably an attraction. I think there's probably also some sort of like sense of unity. It seems like something that goes through a lot of definitions of beauty is whatever you're looking at it, at like something that's beautiful, it's just like that thing or that concept, it makes sense. Maybe to speak like Aristotle, it seems like it's perfected itself. It's doing what it was meant to do. There's just a unity in the object such that you get it. It's almost immediate in a lot of ways. And then there's, I think, a little bit as well of a social element, and this can kind of like bridge into the ethics or the politics. But I think Kant, I think he was the first time I ever ran into this, but just the idea that whenever you're calling something beautiful, you also, at least implicitly, want other people to agree with you.
Right.
So like, so if you call like a song beautiful or something like that, and you're sharing it with your friend, it's not just that, you know, you want your friend to have heard this. You want your friend to like also marvel in the beauty of that song with you. And so I think like as general characterizations of beauty, I think I would go with that. We can get into specific definitions if you want. But yeah, I mean, I think generally you're attracted to it. Generally it just seems complete.
Yeah.
Something about it, there's no need really to have reference to anything else. I mean, you could potentially. And I think there's a social element. We like want to share it with other people, and we want other people to agree with us, I think.
Yeah. A lot of times, as I've been interviewing folks, as Kim and I have been interviewing our guests about beauty, my default position is to go to Kant.
Okay, yeah.
So it's interesting you brought up Plato and Aristotle right away. That's not my default, because my first, you know, as an undergraduate, I ran into it. I mean, I studied the critique of judgment, right? And so I ran into beauty head on, right? And the one thing that, you know, to follow up on your comments on that, and what really strikes me about that is that beauty should be something not only that is attractive, but that you want to come back to, that you want to keep coming back to.
Yeah.
So it's something that, you know, that kind of underlies the possibility of kind of a sustaining system or something like that. So beauty itself turns out to be something that, you know, should be at the heart of Plato's Republic.
With respect to beauty and Greek philosophy, what's kind of interesting about it is, so like different historians of art or aesthetics will kind of disagree as to what the label aesthetics means or what philosophy of art means. I mean, I think like the most traditional, at least today, is like, well, you know, it kind of starts maybe 17th to 18th century and you move forward. But my head is stuck in ancient Greece. Yeah, I mean, although also the future, talking about fantasizing about living on the Starship Enterprise and hanging out with Diogenes and all sorts of people. But for the Greeks, even in the Republic, which is this book about what justice is or what the ideal society would be like, the word for utopia that Plato uses in there is the kalipolis. And that's, you know, that's two words, kalos, meaning fine or beautiful or good. It's got all of those associations, and then polis, which is the city. Yeah. And so it's not even like it's not yeah, it's not even like an aesthetically neutral term.
Yeah.
It's a term that I think implies that like maybe we would be attracted to this Kallipolis. Everyone there would be beautiful. Stuff would just be good. And for me, like you, focusing on that intersection between ethics and politics and beauty, the Greeks pretty well try, especially Plato, I think, try to connect the true and the good and the beautiful. Those kind of like that trinity of concepts, the true, the good, and the beautiful, kind of hang together. And it's implicit, maybe, explicit sometimes, that if something is really true, then it's also going to be good and beautiful. Or if something is really beautiful, then it's also going to be good, and it's also going to like express some sort of truth. Those three things hang into some sort of unity, at least for the Greeks. Now, contemporarily, a lot of people push back, and so I think like famously, Vladimir Nabokov, when he was writing Lolita, one of the things that he was explicitly trying to do was show that goodness and beauty fall apart. So he basically wrote this really gorgeous, important novel about a pedophile. And he knew exactly what he was doing, and he was showing, see, these things do not have to hang together. I can use my words to make something beautiful that is incredibly repugnant. Now, the end of the novel complicates that, and it doesn't end up well for the characters in that novel. But I think the Greeks would just be like perplexed by that.
Yeah. So the truth of
Why
it
would you
falls
do that?
apart, though.
Yes. Yeah.
I guess that's where you're going with that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's why I usually start with the Greeks, because they're beginning those conversations, and I think it's kind of like a cultural disservice, something that's happened maybe historically, I couldn't say, but probably in the last century or so. This idea that like art is exclusively something that's in a museum or in a gallery or whatever else, that just seems weird. And I think that the same sort of thing can happen whenever we have, I mean, obviously not with you, but we're both professors, right? Whenever we talk with students, if we're talking about these concepts of like beauty or aesthetics or whatever else, there might be a temptation to only apply that to these really big, important things, you know, the stuff in museums or the stuff in history books or whatever else. And that's not the case. I mean, it's all around us.
Yeah.
There are big effects. There are ways in which we're judging so many things by the terms beautiful or ugly, the ways in which we're playing into different ways that we perceive things or whatever else. And I think that comes out especially in the ancient Greeks again, because Plato, he's critiquing basically their form of mass art. Everyone in Greece would basically be subsidized to go to these giant religious festivals where there would be Olympic Games or whatever, or there would be, plays, a couple of tragedies and a comedy, and they knew their culture through these things. So it would be a little bit like us critiquing what's on TV, you know, maybe in a slightly more elevated way, but that's kind of what's going on. Whereas like one of the big challenges, if your student is maybe too humble, is like, well, I don't know anything about beauty, or I don't know anything about art. And it's like, no, hold on. You actually know a lot about both. Let's just like start to analyze these sorts of things.
Yeah, well, if coming back to my point about beauty being something that we want to come back to, right?
Yeah.
If it's at the heart of the Kallipolis, right?
Yeah.
And that city never came about for Plato. You know, there's something to be said about his judgments about beauty that, you know, we can raise questions regarding. I wrote an article one time about introducing philosophy of the city, and I started with the Greeks and this intention to create a kind of beautiful city.
Yeah.
And basically went through the Middle Ages and up to the modern period, you know, to get to the idea of the construction of beautiful cities in the modern period. And it becomes an important task, you know, where, you know, as opposed to having finding beauty in a museum or something like that. Beauty's all around us, or we can create a polis where beautiful experiences happen, and people will be then attracted to stay in their cities and be good city dwellers who are functioning well and who enjoy their city and who find beauty in the place that they live in, right? Eating bean burritos.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's it.
But there is that phenomenon actually, and it started with the Haussmannization in Paris, the destruction of the ghettos in Paris and the creation of a beautiful city that then got modeled for New York and Chicago and all these other cities after that. Right?
Yeah.
Anyway, this is a good start, but that's only question number one.
Okay.
So, but you said,
let's see where we go.
Again, prior to us getting started, you said you'd have a lot to say about aesthetics. Is beauty just one function of aesthetics, or is aesthetics something entirely different than beauty? I think it's embedded in there, right?
Yeah, I mean, so, it's one of these things where writers or scholars or whatever will quibble about the definition of the term. In its broadest sense, aesthetics is using the Greek word aesthesis, which just means to perceive things. I guess it could be used in scientific concepts as well, or contexts as well as artistic ones.
Well, let me stop you just there before you go on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because the perception part is a little complicated.
Yes.
Because aesthesis, has to do with our sensibility, our sensible engagement in the world. So it does include perception, right? But it's how we have our sense engagement in the world, right?
Right.
Aesthesis itself.
Yeah.
Knowing you and knowing what you know about Hegel,
okay, yeah.
You know that he has something to say about perception, which is a little bit complicated, that it's not just an act of perception, right? Aesthetics. But it's our sense sensations in the world, how we're embodied in the world in some way.
Sure. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I interrupted you. I just wanted to make the Hegel comment.
No, that's fine. I mean, it just depends on what direction we want to take the conversation into. I'm okay with all of that. I mean, I think what's interesting about if we're talking about perception, and especially if we're talking about someone like Aristotle or Hegel, or if we get into phenomenology or an activist psychology or something like that, one of the interesting ways is, again, there's a way in which, some scientists or some scholars can just think of like this, the abstracted eye, this like completely a priori, unconnected, I don't know, homunculus hovering out in nowhere, just perceiving things. But that's not how it works. Very much we're embedded in systems. Very much our bodies act on certain things. Right. Our environments work on certain things, and it's all sorts. So I like the connection to the architecture, to the city, because when you travel, one of the ways that people might talk about a city is like, well, what's the vibe like there? Like what does it feel like?
Right.
And it's hard even really to express it a little bit, but you start to fall back on, well, the people are such and such, or the food is such and such, or the pace of life is this, or generally speaking, you kind of
it's
arrange yourself
chaotic, dirty,
exactly.
And, all these judgments, all these aesthetic judgments, right?
Yes, and it's all for something that you don't really think about impacting you, but it's funny, when you travel, for certainly, I feel it. I don't know I'm sure other people do, but it's definitely one thing that I notice when you're going through stuff. So that idea of aesthetics or perception just kind of encompasses all of those kinds of judgments, I feel like, broadly speaking. But maybe the lion's share, the biggest portion would probably be about beauty. And philosophy of art. Philosophy of art, aesthetics, insofar as they intersect, they're usually talking about beauty. Maybe they're talking about what art is or what art does or what the aspects of art are. So I think beauty is kind of the biggest part of it, but turns out that perceiving beauty or the things that you would say are beautiful are really complex, and so the conversations just go all sorts of places.
Yeah. Well, one of those ways to go is you did mention, we can circle back and cover some similar ground, some some of the same ground again, but in a different way, right? Is that, beauty is a judgment. To say something's beautiful is a judgment that you want somebody to agree with you.
Yeah.
Right?
That's right.
So right away, we get into kind of intersubjective cultural determinations.
Yep.
Like when you go to a different city, you're experiencing something different.
Sure.
It's not your home city, it's another city. You're experiencing a different kind of culture. And at that point, you might want to say, this is not some place I'd want to come back to. Right?
Yep. I know those places.
Yeah, there are some of those places, right? But then there are those places. The first time I entered Paris, I was a graduate student, and we drove in at night, and the person I was with woke up. I was driving, and we drove onto the Champs-Élysées, and the streets were all lit up, and the fountains were bright with lights. And my partner said, this person I was with said, I want to live here forever. This is so beautiful, that kind of thing. But by the time we left, we never wanted to come back because the cultural dissonance was so stark because neither one of us knew French. And so it was really difficult.
Sure.
So there was that kind of aesthetic experience then.
Yeah.
So even though there was this initial beautiful vision, right, the kind of experience of seeing the beauty of the construction and the architecture and the play of lights and all that, when we got into the living conditions of the aesthetics, eating, getting around, trying to avoid all the dog poop on the sidewalk.
Sure.
We couldn't wait to get back to Germany.
Yeah.
Where everything was kind of clean.
Orderly.
Yeah. And we got enough food at the meal times.
Yeah. No, that's totally. I mean, I think that's right.
Yeah.
You have those initial experiences, and the initial experience. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how to integrate this into what the definition of beauty is or anything like that, but there's ways in which we can make errors about things.
Yeah.
I don't think we can make errors in the sense that like we have certain experiences. There's no denying that, but we can make errors about certain. So like coming into Paris, everything's lit up. You're being, driven around or whatever else. This oh yeah, this is amazing. You just sort of take it in, and then you get to know it, and it's like, ooh, I don't know. Like maybe I saw it in the right light when I saw it. And then I think it also works in the other direction, where you could be in a place that's ugly or that doesn't make much sense, and then the more you kind of get used to it, it's like, oh, okay, this is like pretty all right, or like I like this, or I can be in different ways, in the way that I am, like in this particular place. So I feel like that's also something that can happen. And it's going to depend on the person too. I mean, like different environments suit different people. So for example, I grew up in a small town called Dumas, Texas, which is up near Amarillo, and there's nothing up there. And so it's very, very sparse. It's kind of like El Paso, except instead of mountains, we have canyons. So it's kind of like the foil in that way.
I've been to Amarillo.
Yeah. So that's the vibe. And I remember some of my friends from Austin, where I went to school, one of them in particular came up to visit me, and he was like, this is the most isolated place I've ever been, because there's nothing there. You have to drive an hour from Amarillo to Dumas, like through nothing to get to where I'm from. And I think some people would say the same thing about El Paso, right? It's sort of like on the frontier, very, very much so. You drive through a lot of the Southwest from whatever direction, and then you get there. But one of the things that's also interesting is because of my cultural background, because I'm Latino, I was living in the Southeast a lot. So I lived in Nashville and then Louisville, Kentucky, and I liked those cities quite a lot. But I almost forgot how easy it is to be fluid in the right kinds of places. And so you come to a place like El Paso, and it's like, oh, okay, wait, I know this culture, I know this language, I know how this stuff works, and then suddenly stuff is kind of like working again. Whereas like a lot of the stuff, just like whenever you're visiting or whenever you're not from there, you just have this I guess cognitive load, always trying to figure stuff out. And I think the aesthetic concepts are like really operative there, trying to figure out why people like what they like, trying to go to the places that everyone says are cool, finding your own places, and you just never know how necessarily it's going to turn out. But eventually, I feel like you kind of get a overall judgment about whether you like living there or not.
Yeah. But it's based on this kind of aesthetic experience, though,
Correct,
right? Yeah, it's
right.
based on that. So that's that kind of the foundation piece, is that how we come to know a place has to do with our sensible fit in some way, or our sensibilities about the place.
Right.
Right? And I'm not from the Southwest.
Yeah.
I'm from the Northeast.
Yeah, yeah.
And when I came to the Southwest, this place was so, well, my daughter at the time, when she came, she said she stepped off the bus and she thought she stepped into hell.
Oh, did she come in the summer?
She came in the summer. It was 115. It was 115, right?
Yep.
And it had been 115 for like, this was a heat wave. It was a record-setting heat wave in 1994. And it had been that way for a month or something like that.
Right.
It was just incredibly atrocious hot and not green. And there was no water,
Yep.
and all that. But since then, she settled here. Now she lives permanently in Albuquerque. She's fallen in love with the place.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
But
There's that kind of aesthetic experience that gets developed over time.
Right.
And I don't know if this has to do with the question of beauty. That then is beauty something that can be cultivated in that kind of over time aesthetic?
Yeah, it's one of those things.
Acculturation.
So maybe this is where we start to get into the politics of certain things. Because again, I think there's a way in which if you only read Kant or if you only read Burke or something like that, and it's not anything bad about those, but you can get this idea that beauty or similar sort of whatever aesthetic judgments you're making, it really only belongs to like art or landscapes or, maybe with Plato, it belongs to stuff like love or
right.
some ultimate reality, right? But one of the important things that a lot of like feminist art critics and indigenous people have very rightly been fighting for a while is, well, like, let's not denigrate all of the so-called crafts. Some people will try to make a distinction, for example, between art and craft.
Oh, right.
Where like art is the high hoity-toity stuff.
Low art, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I get how Michelangelo's David is art, but like, is that rug or whatever else actually art? And I would say, yeah, totally. Like if you've ever seen like the beadwork by Native American people, I mean everywhere since we're in the Southwest, but especially in New Mexico, because we're talking about Albuquerque, or if you go to Taos, or you go pretty much anywhere, you see that sort of stuff, and it's like, no, that's very much beautiful. It's very much an aesthetic thing, and those things matter maybe even more than what's in a museum, really. And I like the idea of connecting the travel to the aesthetic stuff, just in the sheer practicality of it. If you decide that you want to take a vacation, it is not that usually, if it's a vacation proper, I guess, that you're going there to accomplish something. You're going there to basically just revel in aesthetic delights. What are you going to eat? What are you going to go see? Right. What is it going to be like when you smell the fresh mountain air or something like that? It literally is all about positive aesthetic sort of perceptions that you're trying to surround yourself around. And I think in a certain way, it can be renewing or healing, which was also one of the questions that you had on your thing about how
that was further
aesthetics
down
can
the
be healing.
list. How is art healing?
Yeah.
Right. That's an interesting point because, I spent some of my time as a graduate student living in, actually a good chunk of my time living in Germany. One of the differences, the socio-political differences between that society and ours is Germans are mandated to take vacation, you know,
Yeah.
a big long 6-week vacation over, you know, every year. And they go away to these kind of therapeutic spa-like healing places to actually have this aesthetic experience that then heals them and helps them to become good workers, right?
Yeah.
Better workers, right? So that's
Yeah.
part of the issue. And I've been reading lately, something I read recently about US Americans and how much more we work than other, you know, equivalent cultures in the world,
Yeah.
right? And how much more unhealthy we are
Oh yeah.
than other cultures.
Oh yeah.
Because we work too much and don't do these kinds of aesthetically healing sorts of things, right?
I mean, I think that's without a doubt. I mean, that's absolutely right. And you know, to tie it back to that conversation about playfulness,
That's very nice.
I don't know if my definition of playfulness that I offer in the book is any good.
Can you tell it to us?
Yeah, sure. Aristotle basically defines all of the virtues with respect to some emotion or sphere. So one of the most important Greek virtues is the virtue of courage.
Right.
And courage as a virtue is the ability of someone to face fear well. A courageous person is not someone who's never afraid. You can listen to it, you sort of understand it. You need to know how you react in the face of things. But it's also not someone who is like completely overwhelmed with the fear, and so they're cowardly. So what you have is like courage is kind of this mean between the extremes. It's the moderate way of being, and maybe it's a middle path sort of thing with respect to fear. You can fear too much, you can fear too little.
Right.
The courageous person is somewhere in the middle. And so I took that pattern and I tried to apply it to something that Aristotle talks a lot about, but never really tried to come up with too many explicit virtues, which is leisure time. And leisure is a really difficult concept to try and define, but I just basically say leisure time is free time. It's the time where we don't have to work, we don't have to worry really about anything else. And one of the reasons why I tried to like shed some light on it is because I feel in a lot of ways we don't pay enough attention to the ways that we spend our leisure time. And it's a kind of interesting thing because like you can, I mean, I noticed this with myself. I can tell how well I'm doing based on like what I'm doing in my leisure time. Like if I'm just staring open-mouthed and drooling in my leisure time, I probably have a little too much on my plate to where like I just need to drool at TV or whatever else. But like I know I'm doing a little bit better whenever maybe I pick up my guitar, or whenever I call up a friend and we go to like, you know, go to a nice restaurant or something like that. Like whenever I can use it to explore or build myself in better ways, that's like usually a pretty good indication. Now sometimes you just have to rest, and I think that's really important. But talking about Americans, very often our leisure time just is that like whatever enables us to be more productive, and that's kind of sad. It's kind of sad that we don't take advantage of how nice life could be. And I saw this the first time, Jules, like I remember the first time that I was confronted with this was I studied for a summer at Notre Dame, and there were a lot of people in some of the labs doing stuff. And I met this Italian guy. And one of the things that he was complaining about was that Americans work too hard. He was like, I can't keep up with my lab mates. They're always in the lab, they're always doing work. And he's like, what's sort of wild about this whole scenario is that when I was in Italy, this guy said, I was thought to be the crazy person because I was the one who was working a lot. But I come to America and just you Americans are working so hard and I don't understand and I can't keep up, and it's just really, really tough. So he's, you know, and for him, he was like, man, like I just want to like eat some good food, drink a cup of wine. Notre Dame has these like gorgeous paths around ponds and stuff like that. So that's what I want to do, you know, like there's no reason for me to spend 10 to 12 hours in a lab every single day or whatever else. So there are ways in which like our leisure or our aesthetic experiences or our interactions with beauty or something like that can get short shrifted in a world that emphasizes so much usefulness or productivity or whatever else. Not that, you know, a really nice, I don't know, wrench couldn't be beautiful in its own way, but there is this sort of intrinsicness, meaning that beautiful things just, they don't seem to need the same kind of justification that other things need, you know? Whenever I teach,
there's value in and of itself.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, for something that's beautiful.
Exactly.
Just having that, just being in the beautiful experience, or having that beautiful, it's valuable in and of itself. You know, Kant captures that with this purposeful purposelessness. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That kind of phrase, that paradoxical phrase that he comes up with. But I didn't quite catch the definition. Is it a kind of a balancing sort of?
With respect to beauty or?
Playfulness.
Oh, sorry.
Is it a balancing of one's life rhythm or something like that you see in the Virtue of Playfulness or something?
No, I completely got lost, Jules. So I'm glad that you brought it back.
No, that's okay. I have a habit of just listening and following. So
yeah. So the virtue of playfulness is that we use our leisure time well. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by using our leisure time well is like resting, developing ourselves, or engaging our communities. And those are the kinds of things that I kind of talk about. Now, if I mentioned a couple of times, although I don't know if I want to stick to this, I would say via intrinsically rewarding experiences. But the idea is it relates to our leisure time, and it relates to using that as well as possible. And so some people are like, well, I don't know, is that really playfulness?
Are you smuggling in the usefulness factor though? That's what I would ask
as far
you.
As
if I was commenting on your presentation there, right? Are you smuggling in, I have to use my time to develop myself well, right? Or something like that?
No, so this is like something that a lot of people have, like, I don't know if this is right. But I think maybe is the idea. But one of the reasons that I like the Greeks so much is that they are explicitly focused on becoming as good a person as possible and living as good a life as possible and forming just communities. And so whenever I say, well, that's kind of like the standard by which I'm judging things. The big questions, the big goals of like, am I becoming who I want to become? Am I forming the kind of community that I want to form? That's kind of what I mean by well. Because I think it's also important, because the other thing that I noticed about Americans, which is really interesting, I think it happens with other cultures as well, but I'll just pick on Americans because I'm American.
U.S. American.
Yeah, U.S.
Because there are other Americans, right?
That's right.
If Kim was here, she would be reminding you of that, because she wrote a book on what does it mean to be American, right?
No, that's right. We live in Las Americas, so yeah, U.S. American, right?
Yeah.
I noticed that whenever I was looking at my students before class or just after class or whatever, they would pull up their Google Calendar or whatever, and it would just be full of blogs. And I'd be like, well, like, when do you sleep? When do you get rest? When do you have like 10 minutes to drink a cup of coffee? Like you just don't do it.
10 minutes to enjoy a cup of coffee.
Yeah,
Where's the enjoyment part of it, right?
Yeah, it's astounding. And occasionally you'll run into these like vacation types, right? Where they will, in fact, like some of my German friends made fun of their German compatriots in this way. You have like an itinerary from like 7 a.m. to like 11 p.m. full of activities that you're gonna do, because you're trying to maximize as much the time that you have. And I don't, I appreciate that you might need to do a lot of things to make sure that you're taking advantage of special circumstances or whatever. But I think it would also be a really big disservice to enjoyment or presence, to just let yourself be in certain ways. And so if we take this back to like aesthetic experiences or art, Iris Murdoch has this, so she's a famous philosopher, but she was also a novelist. And so she's this person who walked both philosopher and artist lines very, very well. And she has this like pretty famous passage in Sovereignty of the Good where she's talking about unselfing. And so she's like, she's just had, I think, a little bit of social drama, a little bit of damage has been done to her reputation, and she's like not feeling very good about it. And then she looks out her window and she sees a kestrel, a bird just kind of hovering, and she loses herself. She just takes it in, watching this bird hover in the sky. And who knows how long it lasted, maybe only a few moments. And then she comes back, and suddenly the slights or whatever the drama just doesn't matter as much anymore. And so there's also a way in which I think, those aesthetic experiences, those connections to bigger things, those like really deep experiences that don't seem to need any other justification, they can kind of ground us. Because it's really, really easy to get lost in the BS of life.
Yeah.
You could think that driving the Audi or living in the fancy apartment complex or whatever it is, I'm thinking of like urban life especially, eating at fancy restaurants is what it's about. But like, I feel like the people who I like spending time with are people who are just as attuned to appreciating the beauty or the artistry in mundane things. And in fact, like what Murdoch, so Murdoch was once asked what the difference between philosophy and art is. And I basically just use her definition all the time because I think it's a useful one. I don't know if I agree with it, but I think it's really, really useful. She talked about philosophy as being the discipline of trying to clarify as much as possible obscure subjects. So philosophers try to understand, justice or rightness or beauty or whatever else. Those are hard things. And so when philosophers are trying to speak, they're trying to speak as clearly as possible. It's hard to do because it's tough to think about that stuff. Whereas she felt that whenever she was a novelist or whenever she was acting as an artist, very often what she was trying to do was mystify the mundane. So, if you ever read a really good poem or if you ever watch a really nicely shot movie or something like that, you can see how just like an everyday scene can be elevated to the point of like artistic contemplation, and I think that's like, that pretty much rings true, at least for the way that I experience things. Really good artists can make you question stuff that you've done a million different times, right? Who cares about grass? Like, hey, you walk past grass all the time. Then you read a poem about how grass moves in the wind, and it's like, oh, wait a second. Even though I've seen the grass a million times,
Right.
I slow down and I look at this and I kind of appreciate it.
Yeah.
Or, it's all sorts of stuff like that.
I've been, for some last couple of years, I guess, I've been working on trying to understand Nietzsche. I guess I've been trying to understand Nietzsche for a long time, also since my graduate days when I first started reading Nietzsche. But as you're talking about the loss of Iris Murdoch and the loss of the self and seeing the kestrel, I'm thinking Dionysus, right? And this kind of loss, this bacchanalian, Dionysiac loss of ego.
Right.
And being able to merge with the rhythm of one's environment, which is what I think Nietzsche was getting at. And then I thought of James actually in this kind of thinking of the frontier between art and philosophy that you sketched out rather quickly with Murdoch.
Right.
Who said a very similar thing, that philosophy is this really incredible, difficult, the way to try to think clearly. I forget exactly how the quote goes, but it's the task of thinking clearly.
Sure.
Right? And for Nietzsche, that's the Apollonian function, right?
Sure. Yeah,
that's the Apollonian function, to come up with the solidified ego.
Right.
After you lose your ego, you lose your ego in your environment or whatever wherever you're going to, whether it's, Venice or Sils Maria or Turin or whatever. But then that gets reconstructed as you enter into how you're connecting with the place and how you become yourself then in this new environment, right? So it's kind of fascinating sorts of stuff, to think about, because we're all trained to be egocentric. This is part of what it means to be a human being, is to have this kind of stable ego,
right,
that well, in the United States works a lot. Doesn't play, when we do play, play has to have a function.
Sure.
It has to kind of fit into our work life or something like that.
And I, just to emphasize, I think like an important point about this conversation is that a lot of people will pay very, very special attention to how they spend their money, or like where they go to school or whatever else. But you don't think about paying the same sort of rigor or scrutiny toward like what kind of music you listen to or something like that. Because there's a way in which that, some people have noticed this about play or art or whatever else. You can learn a lot about a person based on the things that they value or spend their time with.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what Aristotle was especially worried about with respect to leisure is whenever there's no necessity impinging upon you, not telling you what you need to do, you sort of reveal kind of what you value most. Like when you don't have to do something and you still choose to do it, it reflects maybe even in a deeper way where you are as a person or what kinds of things you're valuing or whatever else. And I think that that's like, not that everyone has to be into art in the same ways or whatever else, because I'm an aesthete, so I'm pretentious and hoity-toity in lots of different ways. But to a certain extent, you can learn a lot about a person based on the aesthetic experiences they like. So like my dad, for example, the memory that I will always have of him, I think, is listening to oldies. He had this canary yellow Volkswagen Beetle, and he loved to listen to like Santana or Golden Oldies and just cruise through the streets of Clayton, New Mexico, which is where he's from. And so when I was a kid, of course, I found this horribly boring. But as I got older, I was like, okay, I get this. Like this is nice, man. You have like a belly full of like tortillas and green chili or something like that. Cruising with the Volkswagen, got some Santana on the radio. And I was like, okay, like I totally get this.
Yeah.
And I think that, it also shows that like one of the things that I admired about my dad was just like that ability to relish in the simple pleasures.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I'm like pretentious and complicated, and I feel like I need a lot of like civilization and philosophy and all sorts of stuff. But my dad was, he just needed some fresh tortillas and green chili and Santana on the radio. And I was like, okay, like, one of those things where I felt like I understood him more through the aesthetic experiences or through the things that he valued. I mean, I don't know that he would call them art. I would call them art. And I think it helped me to connect in a very human way with my dad.
Yeah, the other part of it was he had a place to cruise through too.
Yeah.
A very familiar sort of place.
Sure.
That he felt at home with.
Right.
I don't want to let this question go without being asked because Kim always insists on it. And so in her spirit, is there a kind of a way that you could understand that cultivating beauty or cultivating this sense for the simple, playful pleasures in life can be politically important, like promoting more peaceful relations between people or something like that? I think you're moving in that direction anyway.
So specifically to be used in good ways?
To be used in good ways.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
That's
Yeah.
kind of, I guess, it.
Yeah.
To promote the public good, I guess.
Sure. I mean, so you were talking about like medieval cities?
I mean, I've studied medieval cities a little bit and lived in some of them.
Yeah. So like there's been a little bit of traction on like TikTok and social media with third places. So who knows whether social media has a proper sociological understanding of third place, but as it's used on social media and by certain sociologists, the first place is your home, second place is your work.
Okay.
Third place would just be something else, right? And I think that third places, those places where we go when we aren't sleeping or tending to like somatic bodily needs,
Right.
Or we're not working, are really, really important. So like bars, cafes, churches, public squares, all that kind of stuff. And those are really,
Parks.
really important, parks, because you just get to be human around other humans.
Yeah.
And it's one of the, living in El Paso, the climate can be pretty extreme, so it's tough to kind of have those spots in certain ways. But if you think about really, really great cities, or even just like good neighborhoods within a city, very, very much so, they have those play spots where you can just go and hang out. I mean, and this is a very, very old tradition. Philosophy was born in a lot of ways in gymnasiums. And it's coming from the Greek word gymnos, meaning naked, right? Because the Greeks exercised naked and had these intense sports. But they were like literal physical gyms that then eventually turned into places that also hosted lectures. So Plato's Academy, Aristotle's Lyceum, that kind of stuff. And a lot of the Greek philosophers had this idea that you were training your body and your mind and forming a community to do this sort of thing. So I think that, you know, thinking about art and aesthetics and the ways in which we play to get together would be trying to create a space where we can play together. And I think that's harder to do than it is to like talk about in a lot of ways, because we can be stratified in certain ways. But yeah, if we as cities or as communities could find places where people of all classes or all races or all religions or whatever else just come together and have fun and are human and enjoy each other's company, that can be something that can really just help us to understand one another in like really fundamental ways.
Yeah, I think we do that in some ways. We do have some of that in our kind of manic obsession with professional sports or just sports in general, you know, in the United States.
Right.
Maybe just in Western culture as well. So we do have that kind of heritage.
Also, El Paso has like surprisingly good coffee.
Yeah.
I've just loved going to the various coffee shops around here. And as I've become a regular, I've also I've tried to form my own third places. So I think, you know, despite the fact that the weather might be punishing or whatever, that there are these third places that pop up. You meet all sorts of people if you become a regular at a cafe or regular at a bar, or you know, we work at universities. Sports games, I think, is so good because it's not just about the game, right? It's about the lead up to the game. It's about, you know, all of the concerts and everything. It's about finding a way to enjoy your time.
Yeah. A lot of times, and I've noticed this because I'm a big pro basketball fan.
Okay.
And one of the things I really like about the pro game that kind of carries on from my own involvement in the sport was that no matter how hard we compete against the other, when the game's done, the game's done. Right. We're having fun doing it, and everybody goes and hugs each other and shakes their hand saying, that was a great game, you know, no matter if you lost or you won. It was just a game that we played to have fun with.
Yeah.
As opposed to, there's been some pretty serious altercations surrounding some soccer matches in Europe.
Sure.
And people have died and things
totally.
like that, you know.
Yeah.
They get so worked up and so nationalist about their sport. It's kind of like defeats the purpose of playfulness.
Yeah, maybe so. Maybe so. I'd never thought to compare. So I have friends from Philly. And I remember one year in the playoffs or whatever, they were like greasing utility poles because they knew that win or lose, people were going to climb them and potentially bring them down. So like that kind of stuff. Yeah. But I'd never thought of like comparing the worst of American stuff to like the worst of European stuff. Because now that I think about it, when I was living in Germany, they were having problems with like...
Oh, that's right, you lived in Bochum.
Yeah, they were having problems with people burning down stadiums.
Right. Like
with flares or whatever else, just from rioting after soccer games or whatever else. And I was just like...
That's just insane.
Like, I get like the binge drinking. I get like, you know, going wild or whatever else, but like burning down a stadium that's a different sort of level.
Right.
Yeah.
Let's maybe deal with one last question. We've had this wonderful dialogue all along. Would you say that in dialogue itself, there's a kind of a beauty that we can experience in these kinds of conversations?
Oh yeah, totally. I mean,
and what would be the nature of that kind of beauty?
Probably depends. So I don't think dialogue is necessarily for this kind of understanding, but I think that there is, like when you have conversations with people and whenever you talk plainly, you know, about what matters in life or where you want to be or whatever else. So for example, when I teach virtue ethics to my students in class, and I talk about how Aristotle wants to think about the good life or the kind of person that you want to be. I think, like, I tell my students, like, think about being up really late with your friends, and the conversation wanders to, like, oh, like, do you want to stay in El Paso forever?
Right.
Like, what kind of person do you want to be? Or if they're over 21, think about, like, having not just one beer, but like 2 or 3 beers, and then suddenly you're like, man, am I like, is this like a good relationship that I'm in, or like, do I like my job actually? That kind of stuff. And I think dialogue kind of evokes those same kinds of things.
Yeah.
Because you're talking, and you're revealing a lot about what you value, and you're kind of relating to another person in that human way. I think humans use language, and that language expresses, for better or worse, the values that, if we're not committed to long term, at least we're trying out. Yeah. And I think that's one of the beautiful things too. If I'm talking with my friends, or if I'm in a context like this, even if I don't end up agreeing even with myself in the future, it's nice to be able to rehearse those ideas, to play with those ideas, and sort of see what they feel like. We can experiment with our identity and all sorts of stuff in art and these aesthetic experiences, and talking and manipulating ideas and that kind of stuff.
Well, I want to thank you for playing with me today in this dialogue. That was a wonderful way to end our episode today, and it's been a true pleasure, experiencing this. I could hear a little bit of that kind of Aristotelian friend.
Yeah, thanks for the invitation.
Yeah,
I'm flattered that you would like that anyone would want to listen to this.
Oh no, this has been wonderful. It's been wonderful, especially to hear about your work and your ideas, and again to share these kinds of ideas about playfulness and beauty and aesthetics with you. So
yeah, thank you, appreciate it.
And maybe we'll have you on again sometime.
I'm game.
All right.
Let me know.
This has been Philosophic Dialogues from La Frontera, and our guest today has been Boomer Trujillo. Please check out our other episodes on EPCC TV. Thank you.